Kia ora, my name is Sloane from Sloane Ranger Studio. Today we're going to be painting Aragorn from the Fellowship of the Ring. Going to be looking at painting some non-metallic metal on his sword. We're going to be doing some worn leather on that travelling cloak and probably some muck and grime all over his boots because Aragorn wasn't too fond of showering apparently during the Fellowship. Can you remember those fingernails? Ugh. But that's what we're going to be looking at. Stay tuned. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks. So in this video we're going to be looking at a few things in particular. We're going to be doing some non-metallic on Aragorn's sword. It's ANDURIL, we want to make it special, so we'll be looking at making it a very bright and shiny metal. We've also got his travelling garb that he's wearing, you know, his duster and his elven cloak, and he's been travelling about, and so that's probably going to be very dirty, so we're going to look at some wet stippling and whatnot on there. And then on his duster, of course, that's an old leather, so we might look at scratching and kind of dirtying up the edges of that. And then we'll base him, finish him off, and yeah, that'll be part one in the Fellowship. And then we'll move on to the next one in the next episode, but stay tuned. Let's get into it. Thanks. So here's our Aragorn. This is from the Plastic 3 Hunters set. I've primed him grey because there's going to be a lot of earthy tones. That big cloak along his back is obviously going to be grey, and there's a lot of kind of muted colours going on. So I thought that grey would be a good one to start with. We're going to be going up and we're going to be going down, and obviously grey falls right in the middle. So along his cloak here we're going to be looking at introducing a little bit of green, because I believe that it was an elven cloak, and I feel like an elven cloak would have a nice bit of colour to it. And obviously the sword is elven as well. Well, remade by the elves, I guess. I don't actually know if it was made originally by the elves. But Anduril was reforged by obviously the elves of Rivendell, so there's going to be some colour in there too. Aragorn himself is going to be worn, rugged. His clothes, you can see there's like little bits of stitch in them. He's been putting them together on the road for years and years and years. And this really feeds into that story. It's really cool. So let's get started. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to start base coating up all of these different leathers. First colour we're looking at is Dryad Bark, and this is obviously going to cover all of this kind of drab tunic area going along in the middle here. Cool. So the next colour we're going to use is going to be a mixture of this Castellan green, this very earthy green, and a little bit of our beloved black ink. So the reason for that is because we want this green to obviously be a little bit unique to Aragorn, obviously. And, well, I just didn't really have a green in my library that suited, so I'm going to mix my own. And from the films, it's a very dark and dull green, but I think all of the interpretations I've seen, it ends up looking very unnatural. And of course this is Lord of the Rings, and everything in Lord of the Rings is very earthy and natural, so I'm going to keep it that way. So let's start by mixing up this green. We're just going to start mixing it into this green here until we get a tone that we're happy with. I'm pretty happy with that right off the bat. You can see I made that kind of dull green there. That's exactly what we're after. So, load up my brush with that, and it covers this entire area here. Awesome. That green and brown is looking so nice already. Very happy with that. Alright, next colour we're going to do will be, let's say, his boots. So we're going to be using a little bit more of a vibrant brown on this one, just to give a little bit of distinguishment from his tunic. So it's not all the same brown, as we've talked about in another video. Brown has a tendency to kind of fall back and recede because of how sort of dull it is. So this is going to be for Aragorn's boots. So I've thinned it down just a little bit, and we're just going to base up all of these boots. Boot leather. Cool. That's that brown done. Next thing will be the darker fabrics and leathers, and so that is just going to be flat black. But because I don't want it to be pitch black. I'm just going to make a very dark grey, and this just gives me a nicer start to working with that black, so it's not all pitch black like I said. Okay, so for the black areas, I decided I'm actually going to use this Corvus black. Cool. Now for Aragorn's hair, I'm actually going to use that same black, but I'm just going to mix in a little bit of that Rhinox, just to give it a little bit something different. I try to avoid using perfect black as a color on its own. Yeah, because it tends to look fairly unnatural. Most things won't be perfectly black. So what have we got left here? Well, obviously this big cloak. So off to the side here, I've got this Mechanicus Standard Grey. Mechanicus Standard Grey, and like we were talking about before, we wanted to give it a little bit of elfiness, so we're going to mix in that Castellan Green that we were using on his other colour. Keep it harmonious. I think we've got all of the colours we want on here. Maybe we'll just whack a little bit of this Castellan on this tiny little Fellowship leaf here, just as a strong point of green, and that should hopefully just sort of tie in all the other greens we've been using. Go. Here I am. I'm the main green. Okay, so everything is now dry. We are ready to slap down a wash or two. So on this cloak and on his main green, we're going to be putting in known oil, probably on his hair as well, and then on the rest is going to be Agrax Earthshade. So let me just do that real quick and come back to you when it's dry. Okay, so that wash is dried, and that did exactly what we wanted it to do. That worked out great. So now it's time for some highlights. So first thing I think we're going to do is do this big cloak. So we're going to take that grey that we mixed up with the green, and we're just going to thin it down. The exact same mix. Keep it thin. Take off any excess there. Just going to come back and tidy up over where the raised points are, to sort of tidy up any mess that the shade might have left. So we've done that. Next step is to add in a little bit of white to the same mixture again. A little bit at a time. That's the secret when you're mixing and blending fabric. It's just many thin coats, getting progressively lighter each time. The more times you kind of go over a fabric with a translucent colour, the more believable it comes, because you're just kind of progressively and very neatly adding translucent colours over top of each other, which makes this really nice smooth blend as you bring the surface area in each time you add a layer. And then once you've done that a couple of times, add in white, do it again. That is the secret to fabric, really. Cool, so we're just going to do that again. This time adding in a little bit more white again. Keep it nice and thin. Alright, cool. I think that's looking pretty good for the highlights anyway. So what we're going to do is we're just going to glaze in a little bit of that tunic colour into the shadows. So we need this to be very thin. So that was our dark, kind of drab olive green. So we need this to be very thin. We're just going to glaze it into the shadows. So see, when I'm doing this, I'm putting the darkest point towards the tip of my brush, so I'm kind of angling the miniature how best suits me to get that kind of pushing paint in feeling. Cool. Well, it's a pretty sexy looking cloak for only a couple of minutes. The next thing we're going to do is do his tunic, and so we're going to be applying the same process where we go back to our base tone, which was that black and the green, keeping it thin, and we're just going to go back, do the same thing we did, tidy it up after the wash. Cool. Alright, so that was quick, nice easy step. We're just going to go, and now we're just going to grab that green on its own. No black, just the Castellan green, I think it's called. I'm just going to start highlighting all these folds of fabric, letting the brush naturally run out of paint as we bring it down towards the bottom. Cool. So we've got that green now, and you can sort of, hopefully, hard to see, eh? Hopefully see that green starting to transition towards the top, keeping it gradual, how we like with fabrics. Now I'm just going to add in a little bit of our white to the same green, make a bit more of a pale olive, nice and thin, and start doing the same thing, but just on a smaller area. Cool. Well, I'm enjoying that. So you can start to see how these highlights up around his shoulder are going to frame his face quite nicely. I mean, kudos to the sculptor, because this is really well designed. But yeah, so we're kind of just drawing up our highlights up towards where we want the focus to be, which is up around his face. So that's it for that green. Now, I want to be a little bit brave here. Let's do something cool. Aragorn, his clothes, I think, would be pretty old and worn, right? And hard leather has a tendency to scratch and scuff, so that's exactly what I'm going to do right now. I've got a little bit of paint on the tip of my brush here, and I'm keeping it on a very fine point, and I'm just going to add some little nicks and scratches, and that's going to contrast really nicely with all that shade that we added before. That cloak has a little bit of texture now, so does his duster. Alright, let's do the same with his under tunic, I guess. Gonna really quickly, no time at all, touch all that up, easy. To highlight dryad, I'm gonna whip out another colour. I'm gonna whip out this one here, Gawthor Brown. It's a really nice one for highlighting wood. Keep it nice and thin. This is the sort of consistency I'm looking for. See, it's not so thin that it's so translucent. Sorry, I'll give it a shot. Not so thin that it's translucent, but it's thin enough that it kind of flows really nicely. So that's just a little dollop of water on the edge of my brush, and I'm just mixing it into the edge of the paint here. And I'll just do that repeatedly. I'll grab a little bit of water, come back to the paint, grab a bit of water, come back to the paint. That's why I like having little drops of water on my wet palette to just kind of... This just highlights some areas. So there was a little bit of stitching just there that can have a highlight. I'm going to be a little bit more crazy with this. Not going to be quite so particular. This is going to be very warm, this part. Lots of little nicks and scratches, and we'll just build them up. We're actually going to use these same two colours on his boots as well. See how I'm building up this texture with all these little scratches? When we add our next colour, that'll just enhance that even more. Fantastic. So there we have started to build up some wear and tear on that tunic that he's got going on, and on his boots, because they obviously wouldn't be in good nick, would they? And then finally we're going to use this colour here, Baneblade Brown. So this is just a much lighter version of the colours we've been using before. Again, thinning it to the same kind of consistency. Want it to flow off the brush and not clog it up too much. We'll just do the same thing, but on a more focused area, so kind of like edges like this, just kind of nicking away at it. Cool. So that is all of the brown leather components of Aragorn's outfit done. So now we're going to move on to the black. So the black, we've got our grey conveniently already mixed up, but it's just a little bit light, so I'm just going to add a little bit of my black ink. I don't want this to be too stark. It starts looking metallic when you start highlighting black with light greys. So same thing, just going to start pulling out some of these details, little scratches and whatnot, because again this is worn leather belts and cool. And for this, what we're going to do is we're going to mix in that light brown that we were using to highlight the brown into this grey. Just gives it a little bit more of an earthy feel. So I've just mixed in a little bit of that colour. And starting to do the same thing. A couple little nicks and scratches. I'm not trying to be too fussy with my highlights here. Things can be scratched and worn off in different ways. And so like the edge of this belt, it's going to be a lot more worn because it kind of dangles around and probably gets caught under things. And so and add some scratches and stuff to the edge of that belt. Alright, last step, gonna mix in just quite a bit more of that light brown now for some very kind of peripheral scratches, or I don't know, whatever the word is, but yeah, stuff along extreme edges. And so yeah, it's going to be the very tip of this belt. Alright, neato. So next thing to do is just do his hair. So we're going to be getting a little bit of that grey again, a little bit of the brown, very similar to that first highlight colour we were using on the grey. Just need a little bit of water. This hair is very silky, need this paint to flow nicely. We're just focusing our highlights on the raised areas, so like this top part of his head where the light would catch the most. You know, hair is quite oily, and because of that it becomes quite reflective and you get quite bright highlights on here. Add a little bit of white to that mix, same thing near the top. So that looks nice and natural. That is yeah, that is my secret to hair, is just kind of thinking very bright at the top, virtually nothing but mid-tone in the middle, and then bright at the bottom again. Cool. Alright, well that is that. I think we're up to the exciting part, which is the non-metallic metal. Alright, so for the non-metallic metal parts, I'm going to be using pretty much these three colours here. You don't have to use these inks, I just like them. Any old black, white, and a dark blue would work, but this is the foundation of steel for me. So we're going to create a dark grey with our black and our white, and then we're going to add a little bit of the blue to give it a cool effect. Being elven, I feel like it would have a little bit of a colourful shimmer. So we've got our black here. I'm going to take a large chunk of that, somewhere around there, and this is going to form the kind of foundation for our steel areas. I'm just going to introduce just the faintest bit of blue, and so hopefully you can sort of see that bit of blue in there. Let's just start basing up this sword here. Okay, so we got that grey on there. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to start putting in some rough highlights. So it's a very shiny sword, so I'm getting some very bright grey here. Let's go. There's a nice big highlight right towards the tip there. Maybe there's another little sort of shimmer down there and another shimmer there. And on the other side, just kind of mix it up a little bit. You can start to see how the metallic starts to take shape quite quickly when you put down these bright highlights. Alright, grey that we made. We got this light grey over here. Let's create a bit of a mid-tone between the two. I'm just going to blend it up just over top of these light areas that we've done. Just going to put this grey tone over top and start to blend out between the two. Cool. So that's dry, and you can sort of see how our metallic is starting to take shape now. So all we've done is put down our bright white, gone over it with a grey, And what we're going to do now is we're going to start some very simple wet blending. This is a term I think everybody kind of gets intimidated by, but it's really not that bad. So I'm going to put down a little bit of my dark grey in these middle areas here, kind of coming up and touching the white right over top. And then the very same brush, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get that white and I'm just going to put it down as well, right at the top as well. Take off any excess, and then while it's still wet, just come between the two. Just kind of feather in between. It's so easy. Got a really nice and simple blend there, and what was that, 5-10 seconds? Let that dry and we'll do the same on the other side. Cool, so I'm going to go do this on the back, come back to you in a sec. Okay, cool, so we've done that on the back now. You can sort of see how that's starting to take shape on the back. It's still a bit rough. So what we're going to do is we're going to start doing some glazes. So glazes, we just want to create an in-between of these two colours we've been using. It's dark and this mid. Oh yeah, you can still see a bit of that blue in there. It's lovely. So we just need to thin this down quite a bit. So you can see how it's very thin, very translucent. And we're just going to glaze this over top of the transitions between the white and the grey. It should start to smooth it out for us. So the more times you do these glazes, the finer that gradient becomes. It's not a hard technique, it's just a matter of practice and figuring out the transparencies that work best for you. But yeah, this blade is starting to take shape. I think we're going to start going down in our contrast a little bit. So we're going to take some black and some blue, nice and thin here. We're going to start glazing it over top of some of these darker areas. Creating convincing non-metallic is all about contrast. Cool, so we've gone and added some contrast. Now we're going to go back and add some highlights. And this is just kind of how non-metallic goes. You're just kind of piddling and working on your contrasts. Now I'm just glazing in some highlights. Alright, I'm feeling pretty happy about this sword now. So the last thing I'm going to do with this, and like I was talking about before, I wanted it to be a little bit magical feeling. So I've got this athematic blue contrast paint here. I'm just going to take a little bit of it. I'm just going to glaze it over some of these midpoints here. The more glazes you do, of course, the more intense it'll become. That's looking pretty magical. So the last thing we've got to do is his skin. So I've got that base skin tone there by Vallejo. It's quite a nice colour. Just thinning it down a little bit to kind of help me cover all these skin areas here. Alright, so using that same base tone, we're just going to add a little bit of white to start working towards a highlight. Alright, so we've got a first layer of highlights there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go back down, and so I'm going to take a little bit of this red, take a little bit of this red here, put it over there, take a little bit of our base tone, might need a little bit of blue, just a touch of blue. Maybe actually just a little bit of black as well. So we've got this thin shadow color here. We're just going to start putting that in under places like his cheeks, his eye sockets, in between the fingers. We'll get our shadows in there, some highlights. Let's go back to our highlight color now. We can just keep on pushing this. Okay, so we've piddled with that skin enough now. I think we're ready to chuck on some eyes. So I'm just going to take quite a bit of white, mix it into that skin tone, rinse off my brush, because what we want to do here is just get the tiniest little amount on the very tip. And then come in very carefully, place in some white in the eye. Of course, Aragorn has brown eyes, I think. And just want to add in a little impression of a pupil. Nice. Okay, last thing that we got to do is we've got this little brooch on him. So there's a little bit of gold trim on this. So we're going to do a little bit of metallic gold on here. When you're doing something as small as this, it doesn't take a whole lot of blending. All I'm going to do is I'm going to get some of this Rhinox here, thin it down, come up to the trim of that little brooch, dot some brown on it. Next I'm going to thin down this yellow here. It's a very gold yellow. I think it's called Heavy Gold Brown or something like that. Yeah, Heavy Gold Brown by Vallejo. Tiny little bit on my brush. I'm just going to dot in some yellow. And then mix in a little bit of white to that gold. Come in again. Even smaller dots, little reflections. Nice. And then the leaf itself, got a couple of colours here that I'm going to use. Lauren Forest and Elysian Green. A little bit of this to kind of dab in there. Don't need much. And then a little bit of the brighter to kind of make it pop out even more. Alright, and I've just realised Aragorn actually has the necklace that Aragorn gave him on him as well. So I'm going to just dot in some white here. See the sparkling necklace there. It's going to be quite a focal point. So I've just put in some pure white there. Let that dry for a second. Alright, so that white's probably dry now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of that Athematic blue. Sorry, I've got my brush in right now. Athematic blue that we were using to glaze into the weapon. And I'm just going to dab a little bit of that over that necklace. A little pop of cool colour in there. That's gonna, oh, that's nice. So one last thing I might do is add a little bit of wear and tear to his cloak. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a couple of browns and thin them down a lot. I'm going to introduce another brown. I'm going to introduce a bit of Mournfang, a little bit more like muddy. Now, take a little bit of Bravery, put that Bravery on the end of your brush, take off the excess, and just start stippling in a little bit of mud along the bottom of this cloak here. Mix it up, grab some of the lighter brown, not too much, we don't want to make big pools of colour here. And we're just sort of stippling this in. We'll build up some layers. Alright, so we've gone and stippled in some of these different shades of brown in and around his cloak and the bottom of his duster here and around his boots. And I really like it. It's kind of further enhancing this blend up towards the top that we were looking for and drawing your eye further up towards the top of the miniature, towards his face and the sword. Yeah, I'm happy with him. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and base him, and I think we'll call it there. Alright, so that is Aragorn all done. I'm pretty happy with how he came out. Got a bit of non-metallic on that sword there. We've got some nice wear and tear on all of his leathers. Bit of weathering and mud and muck like we were talking about on his cloak, using a bit of wet stippling. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with how he turned out. I hope yours is going just as well. Looking forward to the next part of the Fellowship. Comment which one you want to do next. I've kind of got them all sitting around. I'm feeling maybe a Legolas or Gandalf, but we'll see. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for tuning in. I will see you again on the next one. Thank you very much.